So, good afternoon, everybody. I want to start with a huge thank you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I know it's not easy to take this much time out of your day and to come and choose to listen to this topic. I'm going to give a quick intro, and then I want to explain a little bit about why I put this together. So James Scott, I am the Field Chief Technology Officer for Dell Canada. What that title actually means is I get the opportunity to go across the country to work with our customers, to work with our partners on some of their largest transformation projects. And when I look at what is happening across industry, there are three big topics that are coming up in pretty much every single one of my customer meetings and conversations. The first one being still around cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, poly-cloud, adaptive cloud. We don't need any more terms or definitions for what we mean by cloud. I'll touch on it a little bit. Before I took this role, so I've been the CTO now for the last 4.5, 5 years, I was a cloud platform specialist. So prior to this, I spent a lot of time working with customers on actually implementing what I would call true multi or hybrid cloud capabilities. It's impossible to do a session without touching on AI. And I think those first two topics, the last 12 to 18 months specifically, lots of discussions, especially with governments, on sovereign AI, sovereign compute, sovereign cloud. So I guess before I dive into it, the last thing I want to touch on during the session today, and I want to try and touch on all three of these in the sort of 40 minutes that we have, is around data resiliency and sort of a pet peeve of mine on the giant chasm of difference between traditional disaster recovery and cyber resiliency. My first role in IT, I spent about 12 years working with UK government and defense on the protection of assets. And if I look at how that has transitioned over the last couple of decades into the ransomware and the overused phrase of it's not if but when, I'll come on to another pet peeve of mine when we touch on that. I want to try and show how these three are all tightly connected and related to pretty much every modern transformation project that I'm involved in. This was the official agenda. I think the agenda is probably more like this. Hybrid cloud does not mean an on-premise data center, some kind of connectivity, and public cloud. Nothing hybrid, there's nothing multi about it, if that is what's going on today. Having been involved in pretty much all of the major AI initiatives that Dell has been involved in across the country, I can tell you that not a single AI project is solved by just throwing GPUs at the problem. So I'll touch a little bit about what I'm seeing. I'll touch on our personal experience at Dell Technologies on actually implementing AI to drive true ROI. And then, as I said, there is a big difference between cyber recovery and disaster recovery, and I want to touch on how those two things overlap. So it's a lot to try and get through in the time today. So I'm going to move pretty quick, but I would like this to be interactive. It's a small enough group. If someone has a question, if somebody has a comment, please raise your hand, shout it out. I'll repeat the question. We'll go through it. I'd rather have a discussion than get to the final slide that's in my slide deck, but I will leave time at the end if anyone has any questions and they want to come up and go through this. So I'm going to start here. Other than AI causing another topic for discussion, the big topic that comes up in pretty much all of my discussions with customers and with partners is what is going on with VMware and Broadcom. I'm not going to shy away from this topic. I think it's incredibly important. I have been referring to this. This is probably politically incorrect, but as the stages of grief, we go through denial. Oh, it's not really that bad. We go through anger. It is that bad. And we get to acceptance eventually. Okay, we need to deal with this. I will say, in my personal opinion, there is a reason why that technology stack had 70, 80, 90% market share, depending on the statistics you look at. There's nothing wrong with that technology. It's a phenomenal capability, but there are pretty much every customer I talk to has either made the decision to stay on that platform and start looking at alternatives, giving themselves a 1, 2, 3, in a couple of cases I've got 7 years of runway. It is not a simple transition. And I'll talk about what we're trying to do to help customers. I think that is impacting all of these multi-hybrid cloud discussions because, again, if I'm trying to provide some true consistency between what I am doing in public cloud and what I am doing on premises, the hypervisor I use, the way I provide a true on-premises or multi-cloud experience is incredibly important and incredibly dictated by the hypervisor that I'm looking at. The other big challenge here is actually doing this. I said earlier, like multi-cloud or hybrid cloud is not an on-premise virtualization platform and public cloud. Okay, if I want to actually provide some consistency, I probably need to do it through this multi-cloud lens where I'm not just Azure, I'm not just AWS, I'm not just GCP. But in my experience, the biggest contention, the biggest challenge, and probably the most important thing to solve is whatever public cloud that you're in, how do I provide consistency and the ability to say right workload, right landing zone at the right time? And I'll come on to what I mean by that and how we achieve that and what I'm seeing as the common barriers to that. The last point I'll make is that I don't think any of this is possible without a huge focus on automation. If you're trying to build hybrid clouds, if we're trying to build multi-clouds, if we're trying to deal with the influx of AI requests and interest, if we haven't spent the last 5 years coming up to speed with what on earth Kubernetes is and service meshes and Docker images and Helm charts, I've suddenly got that on my plate that I also need to deal with if I'm managing infrastructure for any organization. If I'm trying to do zero trust, if I'm trying to do infrastructure as a service, container as a service, platform as a service, you name it, I can't deal with all of that mess if I don't have a huge focus on automation and orchestration in as much of the technology stack as possible. And again, I'll touch on that really briefly. So this is what we have been working on at Dell Technologies for a few years when it comes to trying to solve some of those challenges. As I said, there's probably other logos I could put on this list, but when I talk to customers, these are the big ones that are coming up. There's interest in what we are doing internally through KVM, what we refer to as native edge, which is putting a basic hypervisor in place to run what I would call kind of core applications traditionally that don't require large data center infrastructure, typically focused on edge deployments, certainly as it comes to the influx of sort of AI and inferencing out at the edge. I always want to say, don't throw anything at me, but I do think there's a huge point to make around staying on that VMware and staying within that ecosystem. OpenShift, I've been a big proponent of what Red Hat is doing here. I think there's some key considerations in that core underlying Kubernetes capabilities of that platform. Nutanix, I know they were up right before me. When you try and look at feature parity between what VMware has and something else, Nutanix tends to bubble up towards the top. I have spent the last decade or so working with Microsoft. I was involved in some of the very first, what we would now call Azure Stack Hub deployments in Canada. I've been involved with them in Azure Stack HCI and now Azure Local, so happy to chat if anyone's got questions on Microsoft's hybrid cloud strategy or canonical SUSE, like going down the open source route and building it yourself. Dell is as guilty as any other vendor in this approach in the past, which was very much your infrastructure purchase is tied to your hypervisor discussion. Where we are today, the conversations I'm having with customers is that is not the future we want to dive into. We want to make sure that the infrastructure is not as tightly coupled, but we still maintain the same benefits, the capabilities, the integration, the orchestration, the lifecycle management, the patch management that we used to have when we produced these. So as a company, again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but we have reference architectures, we have integrated platforms, we have private cloud solutions across all of these pillars. What we announced a few months ago was a strategy that said, how do we simplify this? There'll still be a need for reference architectures, there'll still be a need, and we will continue to partner with Nutanix and VMware on very specific implementations if that's the direction an organization is trying to go. But we said, how do we drive that same level of automation and orchestration regardless of the hypervisor that you're trying to look at? So again, a few months ago, we had our first foray into what's called the Dell Automation Platform with the release of something called the Dell Private Cloud, which today supports VMware, vSphere, and Red Hat, very shortly, the Nutanix AHV ecosystem, with that goal of saying, ingest some servers, ingest some storage, and if that rack for now is all VMware, great. In 6 months' time, if you want to take 3 nodes out of that cluster and re-image them to be a AHV cluster, great. In 2.5 years' time, if you want to re-image the whole thing and turn it into an OpenShift platform, very soon we're going to add Microsoft onto this list. The goal is to say, we understand the challenges that organizations are going through. We understand the choice that organizations are trying to make, and we're trying to help make this choice as easy as possible by saying, at least let's decouple that hypervisor from the underlying infrastructure where it makes sense to do so. I want to stress this Dell automation platform, while it's new to market, is not new as a product. It's been around for a long time. The bottom left-hand corner, we have been using this. It uses an underlying automation engine called Tosca. We've been using this for our edge deployments for the last 3.5, 4 years to say, how do we make it easy to implement the software stack onto hardware as simply and as easily as possible, maintaining all the lifecycle management. We took all the lessons learned from our previous iterations of private cloud deployments, all the work we did with VMware on platforms like VxRail, all the work we've done with Microsoft on Azure Stack. We coupled that with the AI work we're doing. There'll be announcements in the next couple of months on taking this Dell automation platform and starting to use it to make AI implementations easier. And I'll touch a little bit on our AI factory and get onto the second topic. And then AI ops. So as an organization, we've had a product in the market for well over a decade at this point, was called Cloud IQ, now called Dell AI Ops, which is all about telemetry, information, orchestration, event gathering from the underlying infrastructure. All of these we are now bundling up into this Dell automation platform. There'll be a lot more that goes into this platform over the coming months and years. But this then starts to become that high-level orchestration engine for everything that we do as an organization as it comes to deploying not just private, hybrid, multi-cloud platforms, but everything else within our portfolio as well. So that decision, those different hypervisors, that landing zone for the right workload at the right place at the right time is already, in my opinion, having a big impact on how organizations are going about actually adopting AI. I have had the opportunity to work on some of the largest AI projects we have in the country. I'm constantly asked, what's next? Do I need to worry about agentic AI? Do I need to worry about AI frameworks? How do I get the outcomes that I'm looking for? I don't know how many people here saw the MIT study from a couple of weeks ago. There are lots of reports coming out that talk about 30%, 20% of projects that start off as AI pilots, evaluations, make it through into production. I'll say from my lens and my experience, the number's slightly higher, but not by much. I will say to counter that, you don't have to take an AI project, a pilot, an evaluation into full-scale production to have had some benefit from doing that pilot. I think there's a lot of experimentation going on right now. Hopefully, there's a lot of lessons learned. I'm not the first person to make this analogy. I get asked all the time, like, do we think this impact of AI is going to be the same as the internet? In my opinion, the answer is yes, a resounding yes, with a couple of caveats. One, I think it's going to happen a lot faster. I think we're already seeing this. Like, I can't keep up to date with every new model that comes out. The second one is, I think, a more interesting point that I don't know how many people were around when internet boom hits. Every technologist I was working with was running around trying to convince organizations to take this seriously. You need an online presence. You need to think about how we transform B2C and B2B work. Some businesses listened and are still with us today. Some didn't and are no longer with us. The difference with AI is every business that I talk to is pounding down our door saying, how do I do this? And as technologists, we're sort of looking up and going, I don't know, it depends. What are you trying to do? There's not an easy answer. It's not like build a website. It's not quite that simple. And it's being impacted, in my opinion, by three things. One is an actual impact. Talked earlier about ROI and the challenges of taking a small evaluation, a pilot, a test into full-scale production. It's being impacted by scale. How do I actually take these small AI pilots and put them into large-scale production? Because I think that requires thinking very differently. And it's being impacted by security. And I'll touch on that as the kind of the third pillar here today. The first point I want to make, though, is on impact. I think it's really easy to see generative AI equals chatbot. Okay? Quick show of hands. Who here is working with an organization or works for an organization that is already implementing some kind of improved, enhanced chatbot within their business? Okay, about half the team. Okay. I think that is a really important first step, but I think there's a lot more that we can do with AI that's actually impactful to businesses. And although there's a couple of big customer examples I can share, I can be a lot more free and open about what we did internally. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to kind of walk through our lens of this. The first point I want to make is this one here. I spend a lot of my time talking to organizations and asking that exact question, not in a patronizing way, but what makes you special? It's very unlikely to be, we have the best chatbot available. What is the core parts of your business that help you stand out against the competition? What are the core things that your organization is responsible, that is known for? How do we apply AI to those processes? I think it's really easy to look at a bunch of AI tools and go, how do I use that tool for this thing over here? I don't think that's impactful. Most of the impact comes from what's the business challenge, and how do I apply AI to that business challenge? We're not too dissimilar to much of the organizations I've talked to. I have come out of more than a few meetings, and I've been sent a list of their AI projects, and it's 100, 200. In our internal case, when we went globally across the business and said, let's collate everything that we're interested in doing, we had a list of just over 500 different AI projects that different business units, different teams, different countries were interested in implementing. So we used our own services team. We asked ourselves that first question, and we said, what makes us so special? We picked 4 things. This is the big thing I'm trying to work with a lot of organizations on. You can't take 50 things. You can't take 15 things. We're almost 100,000 people globally, a lot of technologists. We have a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. We picked 4 things to go and work on to actually transform the business and change the business. And I think that's the number one mistake I am seeing. So these were our 4. They're not technical, they're not tools, they're not AI related. It's just, we think our go-to-market, the way our sales teams interact with our customers, our services, hopefully when you have a problem and you need to call us, how do we get the answer out as quickly as possible? R&D, we have in the order of about 15,000 application developers. We actually have more software developers than we have hardware developers at this point. How do we improve their productivity? And supply chain. It's been important to us in the past. I will argue today with the topic of sovereign cloud and sovereign AI, that is more important now than it's ever been in the past. And we just started working our way through this. Well, our go-to-market is driven by our ability for our sales teams to be prepared. Our services, how do we do more self-service, more efficient support calls? Software development, a lot of organizations I talk to are also looking at how do I use AI for application and code development, and then a more intelligent supply chain. And we ended up with 4 AI projects from that. Okay, you can ask anyone who works at Dell, certainly within sales and pre-sales. We've removed a lot of our other internal tools and replaced them with an internal chat system, which is all about knowledge retrieval. So if I need to find the specs for a server, if I need to know what's compatible, if I need to find a presentation, I can actually find it now. I don't know about anyone else, but prior to this being implemented, if I wanted to find something in SharePoint, I had to know the exact title of the document. I probably needed to know the date it was created and the author for me to have any chance of finding it. Now I don't have to do that. I can use semantic understanding to find the information. It wasn't perfect. I could spend the next hour talking about the iterations we've been on that journey. Next best action was to say, once we have a call in, someone calls the service desk, what's the fastest path to resolution? What's the next best thing that we need to be dealing with to get this to the end result? Coding assistance. Again, I could talk a lot about this, the different implementations and what we've done. The one lesson I learned from that I've been trying to share with every customer is, as I said, we have about 15,000 application developers, give or take. That entire coding platform is run on 4 servers. They're 4 pretty beefy servers. They're 8-way GPUs with some H100s in, so they're not small. But my point is, you don't need racks and racks and racks and racks of GPU power for a lot of the AI implementations and projects that we're seeing. And again, not every organization I'm certainly dealing with needs support for 15,000 application developers. And then predictive systems. The thing I've taken away from that is not every AI project is Gen AI. There's a lot of machine learning, there's a lot of vision systems, there's a lot of traditional AI that I think is still incredibly important today. So that's how we try to focus on impact, to say how do we actually drive some of these AI capabilities that have meaningful impact to the business, and how do we assess that? Actually, I'm going to go back one. The other lesson learned we took from, especially from that third project, We implemented an internal rule, which is no AI contract is going to be signed for more than 24 months. Okay, this world is moving so fast. We actually spent longer trying to decide which coding platform we were going to pick than it took us to actually implement and start getting the ROI. And John Rose, global CTO, made the point that we cannot keep doing this. Okay, there's always something new and shiny coming up. There's always going to be a better tool available in 6 months' time, but that can't stop us starting to move forward with our AI projects. So the blanket rule is nothing more than 24 months. And I will say that since implementing this, we are already going through a replacement for it. We've already found a better tool, and the coding platform is already being switched to something else. So that impact is really important, but I think how we think about scale is equally important. I love this slide. This is the AI landscape today. No organization wants to deal with this eye chart. I think it's fair to say not every AI project needs to cover every single one of these boxes. My point is, it is really complicated when we think about doing this at enterprise scale. It's really easy for me to go to a platform like Hugging Face and download a model and implement a real small local RAG deployment to do document retrieval or document summarization. Like, that's trivial. I could probably spin something up in less than 2 hours. But as soon as I start doing that at enterprise scale, I've got a lot more that I need to deal with. We'll touch on security in a minute. But this is an incredibly complex landscape. And First Mark, who created this slide, I'm sure we're going to see multiple iterations of this. I have a similar slide from the CNCF when we talk about Kubernetes and containers. This is a complicated world. But when we move from small pilots and tests, we do need to start worrying about, and I'm going to pick a fairly common stack, tools like ClearML, Pachyderm, Algorithmia, Tekton. There are specific tools needed for enterprises to think about this. And again, I'll come back and talk about the security piece in just a second. But this is a huge challenge. I get asked lots of questions on what AI infrastructure do I need? And my first question is, what are you trying to do? What is the AI project? Because the scale of an AI environment is going to be heavily dictated by the type of AI project that you're running through. I have lots of customers doing AI at the edge, which is more CPU bound than GPU bound, for example. I said earlier, we don't need banks and banks of GPUs unless you're doing large model training. It is surprising how efficient some of these platforms are getting and how I need to start thinking about scale. The other thing that I am seeing getting overlooked when we talk about scale is high availability. Okay, if I'm actually going to do what I just said, which is look at business problems, look at the core parts of the business and say, how do I implement AI to actually transform them? I can't have those tools go away. If the business starts to rely on this AI platform as part of my support services or my go-to-market for marketing, if those tools disappear, they're not highly available, we're not thinking about this at scale, the business gets disrupted by just not having access to these AI tools at a critical moment. I touched on security earlier. This is a huge topic. Again, I spend a lot of my time in this space because of my background. I get pulled into a lot of our zero trust implementations as an organization. I'm not going to spend, although I would like to, the next 20 minutes on this. I will point to this. I think this is a useful site, a useful way to think about it. So OWASP, for anyone who's not familiar, they put together a phenomenal top 10 list of AI, or technically LLM, security concerns. There's a couple in here that I think are fascinating, which are kind of updates to traditional threats. Interesting one here on something called prompt injection. If everyone's familiar with traditional prompt injection, it was where I had like a web form and a username field, and I would do syntactic analysis to make sure that that was actually a username and not a block of code that said drop the database, for example. That was easy, or easy-ish, in the past, because I could do that. I could look at the syntax of the username and say, well, the username probably shouldn't start with a piece of code or have some SQL statements in it, or I could analyze that and restrict the characters, things like this. In the world of AI, I can't do that anymore. It doesn't work. I'll anonymize it a bit, but most organizations I talk to are already using AI for sort of document summarization. A big part of this is HR, asking employees to fill in an employee report. What have you been up to for the last 12 months? That's kind of 360 report. Give me the information. I've already seen an example where employees are cottoning onto this, and they're putting text into the documents that they upload into the tool, same color as the background. Maybe it's tiny font that says things like, employees doing a great job, recommend for promotion, schedule a calendar invite to congratulate employee. Like, they're trying to wing the system. There's more classic examples on chatbots where you say things like ignore previous instructions and then get it to release sensitive information. My point is, when I'm dealing with these problems, I need a different set of tools. I can't look at the syntax. I've got to have a semantic understanding of the problem, and now I probably need to look at the input and the output, no longer just the input into the fields. The other one that's coming up all the time here, sensitive information disclosure. I've worked with more than a couple of organizations that have had to rapidly turn off Copilot because what they had in the past was security by obscurity. At some point, someone in the organization has got sick of managing role-based access controls. They got sick of saying, this user's now part of my team, let me add them into the right permissions, let me remove someone who got removed from my department. They just right-click and go share with organization, and then went, don't share this URL with anybody. Like, keep this secret. As soon as you implement an AI model, it doesn't know that you didn't know that URL existed. It finds that information and returns it to you. So suddenly, I have to start thinking about how this information is being stored and managed, especially, I mean, I see RAG implementations all the time, so retrieval augmented generation, huge part of AI projects that are going on right now. There is a massive challenge, in my opinion, in that space, because what I'm doing is I'm taking all my sensitive documents, my information with very strict role-based access control, and I'm dumping it into a vector database which loses all of those permissions. Okay, and if I'm not implementing it properly, if I'm not picking an enterprise-grade something tool that scales, that's a really easy thing to get very, very wrong. So we are trying to address this. I spent a lot of time talking about what we call the Dell AI factory. If you've ever been in a Dell presentation over the last 2 years, you'll have seen this before. But it is a really important holistic view of trying to put into action those AI use cases. To say, okay, an AI implementation does not start with the infrastructure, even for an infrastructure organization. It starts with an understanding of what are the use cases that you're trying to solve and the outcomes you're trying to get from those use cases. Again, part of our internal process was to say we won't intake an AI project without an ROI. Okay, I don't want to know that it's good, that it's better, that it's faster. I want to know what the actual improvements you expect to get from the implementation of this AI system. There are some common themes, so content creation, digital assistants and chatbots, computer vision systems, where we've kind of taken the heavy lifting off and we've said, here's our best way of implementing those types of projects. But it starts with this. I said earlier that an AI problem wasn't solved by just access to more GPU power. Some are, most aren't. Most are held back by this. Okay, I spend a lot of time talking to organizations about data lakes rather than data swamps or data puddles. Or there's just a huge problem with access to the right information at the right time, in the right context, with the right labeling. And I am not aware of a single AI project across the entire country that isn't make or break based on this, based on access to the right data at the right time with the right labeling. We also need to think about the ecosystem. I get lots of questions on AMD versus NVIDIA. There's a reason why we do a lot of work with NVIDIA, and often it comes down to the ecosystem and the tool sets, the actual AI platform. Spent a lot of time over the last few months with Cohere and the Cohere North platform. A lot of it comes down to the ecosystem, what we're trying to build. Only once I know answers to almost all of those questions can I say this is the infrastructure that you need. Do you need banks and banks of GPUs? Do you need a couple of GPUs? Do you need NVLink? Do you need to worry about the model sizes? Do we just need a bunch of high-powered workstations on developer desktops? Once we've thought about the infrastructure, once we understand the use case, then we can say, where are the gaps? How can we help? Do you need help with deployment? Do you need someone to manage and run this for you? It's where we have partners like ITI that support us. How do we operate and run this at scale? So when we talk about AI factories, I sometimes get, yeah, I'll have a medium-sized one, please. I can't do that. Technically, I can. We have an AI factory with NVIDIA that comes in medium size, but by and large, it is not a SKU, it is not a product that we sell. It is this idea of a very holistic discussion on what AI projects an organization is trying to run and how do we help to solve them. So the last thing I want to touch on was a bit of a deeper dive into the impact that all of that is having on cyber resilience and what I would call minimal viable business. There is a big distinction between the security posture, the security tools, the support we help organizations with when it comes to security, versus the resiliency of that system. I, at the moment, probably spend far more time in this side of the house than I used to in this side of the house. And I think there's some interesting reasons for that. I picked these two statistics. The one on the left is probably not a surprise. Like an attacker doesn't get into a business and go, oh, I can see that's their disaster recovery area, I better not touch that. They go straight for that. Probably not a surprise. The bit that always seems to surprise lots of people is the right-hand statistic on this. The fact that most of these attacks, most of these sort of ransomware implementations are not just a deployment of malware. It's typically called living off the land. Somebody gets in, they start to do an escalation of privileges, they spend 3 months, 6 months in the business, hidden away, trying to make as little noise as possible, and trying to work out and map out the organization. Because what they're trying to do is look at the left-hand side of this diagram to say, okay, I've got a primary site, I've got a secondary site. There is a persistent path between those two sites. Okay, the first thing an attacker is going to do is say, what else can I connect to? And if it can see and get access and know about a secondary location, a disaster recovery site, a business continuity site, they know that's one of their objects of attack. Okay, ransomware is going to fail miserably if when they attack your primary data center, you just spin everything back up and running. And again, I think this is probably not news to anybody, but it's incredibly important to think about. What we spend a lot of time doing is to say, I need a non-persistent path. I need a recovery and a backup that is not known to this side. Okay, I need a very separate, isolated, air-gapped environment that pulls, does not push, from my production environment, so that when an attacker gets in and they sit there for 3 months, 6 months, there isn't a configuration file, there isn't an IP address, there isn't information about this site on here. That's half the problem, though. We've been doing this for years. Like, we have organizations across Canada which use our cyber recovery vault. It's their last line of defense. When this gets hit, sometimes this is actually where they find out about the attack. But they know this is a clean copy of their data. That's great, but it's just a clean copy of your data. A lot of the conversations I'm having now is, well, how do I take this to the next level? How do I say, okay, I need to scan what's going on in here, but I need to think about this path. I need to think about this recovery path. I need some type of clean room, some set of infrastructure that I would define as minimal viable business. Because time and time again, we've gone in and said, here's the clean copy of your data, this is all safe, this is all under attack. The security team has said, nobody touch this. I've got to do my forensics, I've got to do my analysis. How do I spin something up that gets payroll going? How do I spin something up that gets core services up and running within the organization and having some type of clean room? I always stress this isn't necessarily all on premises. We do these cyber vaults in clouds all the time, AWS, Azure, GCP. But having some forethought of the recovery location is becoming incredibly important. To me, this is starting to overlap again with the multi-hybrid cloud discussion. If you're, and I'll pick the obvious one, if this is an Azure local, you're running an Azure instance on premises, and you're running an Azure public cloud, this process, this automation, this recovery becomes easier. If you're running all of this as VMware and you're running Tanzu, you've solved the Kubernetes problem, so your AI workloads gets pushed down, and I probably need to think about how that impacts my recovery location for these core AI projects. There is a lot of overlap, as I said, between these three topics. So I want to end here, and then I want to throw it out to questions. I've been using this slide for a long, long time. I still think this is probably essentially what we do as an organization. It's certainly what I spend most of my time doing. There's a line in the sand. Okay, everything under that is keep the lights on. It's core business. It's not driving transformation. It's not implementing AI projects. It's not changing hypervisors to a new platform. It's not implementing foundationally different security models to mean you've got a recovery location in the event of a cyber attack. It's just the core things that are needed for me to run my business. Everything above that line is the true innovation. It's the true transformation. It's the actual implementation of a multi-cloud, not a on-premises hypervisor platform in Azure. It's the implementation of AI services that are actually going to transform your business. Like, the higher we can draw that line, in my opinion, the better. The more we can take off your plate, the more we can help automate, orchestrate, implement the core parts of the business, the hypervisor stack, the AI implementations, the ecosystem of partners, the better. I think one thing we do as an organization very well is partner. No one technology provider on the planet today solves even just one of those three pillars, let alone all three. This is all about partnerships and bringing to market joint solutions that solve some of the biggest challenges today. So I want to try and leave about 10 minutes. I think I've done that. Any questions, comments, thoughts, opinions, quibbles, complaints? Somebody must have one question.
It's very complex. I find the architecture very, very complex.
For everything? I think that's a fair point. I'll go back to the AI factory slide. That's a useful framework for that. It is complicated. When I look at all of this, there's a lot to think about, and it is the reason why I wish I got phone calls that said, I need this many tokens per second for this many users for this AI use case. Almost never. It's, I don't know, how do I implement AI to actually change my business? That's the conversation, and then we start going through all of these pillars. The reason that we focus so much time on this, the reason we focus so much time as an organization on things like the Dell automation platform, is we're trying to wrap this up. We're trying to say, what is the outcome you're trying to get to? I don't know, hypervisor change. We want to move to, again, I'm going to pick the one I'm most familiar with. We want to move to Azure Local or deploy an instance to run Azure Virtual Desktop. Great. Like, I can tell you a very opinionated stack that gives you that outcome much quicker, where you haven't got to worry about firmware revision A and hypervisor revision B and hardware platform C. Just, I need the outcome that you said you would deliver, ideally with the most flexibility possible. When it comes to AI, I think there's a lot of experimentation going on right now. Yep.
But the issue is not AI, it's a security of data
Yep.
infrastructure.
Yep.
AI is something, for me, it's a functionality.
Mm-hmm.
New functionality.
It's a workload. Yeah. Yep.
So in a company, you can have a legacy application. You can have IBM mainframe.
Yep.
You can have AS400. That's running.
Yep.
So I mean, it's a legacy that you have to bring with you compared to a young company that was created a year ago.
Yep.
We have new technology.
Oh, very rarely do we come along and implement this in what I would call a greenfield environment. Like, it's entirely new. There isn't existing storage to connect. There isn't existing networking to connect. It isn't simple. And I'll tell you another related to that. Like, as I said, I joked earlier, I don't have a medium SKU of this. I do. We have an AI factory specifically with NVIDIA that comes in a medium size. I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, a customer will look at that configuration and go, that's great, but I want Cisco switches. Or that's great, but I already have storage. Or that's great, but I have a power envelope that means I can't take that on board right now. There's always changes. We have an army of people. Like, we have storage experts, we have networking experts. Like, my point is, like, we will bring in the right resources to try and reduce some of that complexity. Complexity still exists. It's just that we're trying to say, we've done this before. This is how we would implement it, and this is how we would integrate it into your existing platform. I think the same is true for the security conversation. I spend a lot of time with CrowdStrike. Like, it's not Dell solutions, it's an integrated part of the partners we work with.
So you have to, basic requirement is that you have to do a asset inventory. Inventory assets, that's the basic thing. And I'm not sure that you know what you have, of the assets, data asset, equipment,
Yep.
server
Yeah, but most of the time, that inventory list is important from a big transformation project. Pick AI for a second as a workload. I don't know any organization that's got spare compute capacity that's capable of running an AI workload. So the existing infrastructure resources aren't the problem. It's how do I integrate them with a new stack that I'm going to bring on board. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts?
You talked about the software development. I think that today you're the only one who talks about it.
Yeah.
And this is a question that is quite open. I heard that if we use AI to our software development, AI you would use sources that are the owner has developed the code and it keeps his right copyright on the result is owned by the original code owner.
So, a couple of things. Some of the, almost I should have kept the AI factory slide up. Some of the ecosystem partners we work with, they will do indemnification against that. So they'll say if you end up in trouble because of the generative nature of this code, we'll protect you from a legal standpoint. Like they'll cover that outcome. I think more importantly, from an actual implementation of that, what I am seeing, because I get this question all the time, like, is it actually faster? By the time I get the code and reviewed it and looked at it and fixed it, am I actually going to get improvements in productivity from my application developers? I'll say from our experience, yes. But it wasn't all where we expected it. Like some of what those coding tools are able to do is not just generate new code. I think that's a big part of it. But some of it's also, here's my block of code. Where's the bug? Like we have an issue in the field that's showing up this error message. Analyze this block of code, and with context windows getting as large as they are now, they can ingest everything most of the time that we need. Cut down the triaging of where the problems are, or an optimization problem. Like, here's my code, how do I better optimize it? I am not seeing that level of concern from a code generation perspective. I am seeing it from teams that are looking at implementing like image generation. You suddenly lose the rights to the image that's being generated or the video that's being generated or what. But I'm not having too many concerns from organizations from a coding perspective that their underlying source code. Some of it's just because it's not quite as easy to reverse engineer the source code back from production.
It means that you cannot copy-paste, but you can be inspired by code.
Well, so we are still seeing an improvement, and we haven't officially published the improvement, but it's less than 50 and more than 10. Like, we are seeing an improvement in productivity. But you're right, I don't see any organization doing what's called vibe coding, where it's just like, just do it for me, and I'm going to put it into the main branch and submit it as code. Like, that's fun for experimentation. If you've ever written any code, like the level of output from these tools is phenomenal, but you do still need a human in the loop. There's one of those security things called slop squatting, which is really interesting, where attackers are seeing the made-up hallucinogenic packages that are getting generated in some of this code and implementing malicious attacks based on those codes. So you do still need to review it, but I'll argue if you can get I'm just going to make a number up for a second, 20% improvement in productivity from your application development team, that's probably worth it for most organizations. And again, it's worth it because it's not a $500,000 investment in GPUs. Like, you don't need a giant platform for these tools. I don't know if that directly answered your question, but that's what I'm seeing. Any other questions? Yep. Yes, today. When we deploy, let me go back to this slide here. When we deploy that Dell automation platform, it is, from a lifecycle management and orchestration perspective today, limited to PowerEdge and PowerStore. We have other storage products that you can deploy with it, but it doesn't cover the lifecycle management. There is absolutely a plan on the roadmap to implement custom blueprints using the underlying Tosca libraries that are in there. We are doing it today with, where's the other slide? With this. If I look at our native edge, if I look at our native edge platform in the bottom left of this slide, that today does. So parts of the Dell automation platform, depending on the outcome you're looking for our edge computing, our KVM deployment, yes, we will ingest any hardware. There are some minimum requirements and specs, but the idea is to make this as open as possible and as many open standards as possible. What we're not trying to do is reinvent the wheel, but I am already getting lots of questions from customers like, I've already made an investment over here. I like this idea, but I'm not throwing out my compute platform to bring in Dell storage, for example. So short answer is outside of edge deployments, not today. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I think I'm at time, so I'll end how I started. Thank you so much for the time this afternoon, and I will be around if there's any other questions. Thank you.